Before starting any of your processes, you need to ensure that you've undertaken hand decontamination through hand washing, and that you're wearing all the required personal protective equipment that is appropriate for the task you're about to undertake. These will be listed in your standard operating procedures and will include items like lab coats, gloves, goggles, and masks as needed. Once you've finished with the hand wash and put on your PPE, you'll need to prepare your work areas. This includes taking out any of the consumables that will need to be brought to room temperature, as well as cleaning down your workspace. You'll also need to do things like prepare disc pots that contain 10% bleach. Your workspace must be cleaned at the start and end of every day, as well as in between changes of procedure when you'll be working with different specimen types. The same process will also need to be undertaken if there are any spillages. For fluid spillages, you'll need to follow local guidelines, as there may be additional steps that you're required to undertake. Preparing and cleaning down of your workbench includes not just cleaning down the bench space itself, but any of the equipment you're likely to use, including racks and pipettes. We're now going to discuss the initial sample specimen reception for both rectal and nasopharyngeal samples. These samples will be handed over by motorcycle or messenger driver to the lab. For NP samples, nasopharyngeal samples, one tube with a collection bag will be given. For rectal samples, there should be 3 tubes in a collection bag. The first thing you need to do on receipt of the specimens is to cross-check the data on the data collection form and the samples you've received. If they match, you can proceed to the next step of filling in the checks on the data collection form. These should include: is the sample properly labelled? Is the sample container tightly shut? Is the temperature accurate, i.e. between 2 and 8 degrees C? Is the sample collection time delivered to the lab within 72 hours? And does all the information on the CRF match the form and sample? Therefore, is the sample acceptable for processing? If all the data is appropriate and matches, make sure you complete the form, sign and date. If the data between the specimen and the data collection form do not match, then you'll need to contact the nurse collecting the sample and fill in a DCF13 form. When removing samples from bags, store your nasopharyngeal samples in a different rack to your rectal samples. The next step is to record them in the laboratory lab book or on laboratory software. If you have access to the Freezer Pro software, you'll be able to scan the barcodes on the tubes and also complete some of these options. We're manually filling in the logbook, which is also an option depending on what your local resources are. If you're manually recording in the logbook, you'll need to record what the specimen type is, the patient identification number, the date and time of receipt in the laboratory, the minimum and maximum temperature since being placed in the core box. Once you've recorded all this information, the specimens are now ready to hand over for processing. If the specimens are not being handed over for immediate processing, you must make sure that they are being stored appropriately. Whatever the next step, you need to make sure that the bench is cleaned down after this stage has been undertaken. We're now going to show the primary processing of both rectal and nasopharyngeal samples. These samples will be recorded in your lab book and handed over for processing. The first thing you need to do is make sure that you have all the consumables you will be required for the processing of your specimen types. For rectal samples, you should have 3 vials to process. One labelled CB, carry Blair containing a swab, one labelled DESS containing a swab, and one dry swab. You will now need to add a barcode label that matches the specimens of vials 2, 3 and 4 to your new tube, which will become vial number 1. This vial will be where you aliquot out your Carrie Blair CB medium. The vial needs to be labelled with a barcode and have vial 1 on the side and vial 1 on the lid top. The original samples which have just come will need to be labelled Carrie Blair with swab, vial 2 on side and on top, DESS with swab, so vial 3 on side and on the top, and dry swab with vial 4 on the side and on the top. Vials 3 and 4 can now be put in a label box for freezing at -80. We will now go on to process an aliquot of CB swab vial 2 into vial 1. At this point, you need to vortex vial 2 for 30 seconds. Then aseptically transfer 400 microlitres using a P1000 pipette from your vial 2 into your vial 1. i.e. CB with swab aliquot into CB without swab. This will be vial 1 and will be used for all your primary processing from this point on. When you have aliquoted, discard the tip into 10% bleach. If you are going on to process your aliquot, so your CB without swab, vial 1, within 40 hours, this can go into a rack within the fridge stored at 2 to 8 degrees, and your vial 2, CB with swab, can go into the label freezer box to be stored at -80 with the other samples. If you are not going to process within 48 hours, store your working aliquot vial 1 for separate processing in a separate labelled freezer box at -80 degrees. Now, if you are going to go and process your nasopharyngeal samples after processing your rectal swabs, you'll now need to clean down your workspace prior to starting again, i.e. as if you were starting the day afresh. This will ensure that you prevent any contamination from your rectal specimens to your nasopharyngeal specimens. Cleaning down should include cleaning all items like pipettes. We're now going to move on to processing the nasopharyngeal samples. You will have one swab in STGG medium, and you'll need to prepare a second vial which will be your aliquot vial for your nasopharyngeal sample. This will be a new 2 ml screw cap vial. Ensure that the barcode that you add to what will become your vial 5, your new aliquot vial, is a matching barcode to what is on your vial 6, the STGG medium with swab, in terms of your specimen linkage. Write vial 5 on both the side and the lid of the new aliquot tube. Then write vial 6 on the side and the lid of the STGG medium with swab tube. You are now ready to prepare the aliquot. Vortex your STGG medium sample with swab, vial 6, for 30 seconds. And then aseptically transfer 400 microliters using a P1000 pipette from your vial 6 into your new aliquot, vial 5. Vial 5 then will become the primary processing sample that you will use moving forward. Once you have pipetted, discard the tip into 10% bleach and add your vial 6 to a nasopharyngeal freezer box, which will be stored at -80 degrees. Store your vial 5 at 2 to 8 degrees in the fridge if you're planning to process within 48 hours. If this cannot be done, then store the vial at -80 degrees in a separate designated labelled NP processing box. You will then need to clean down your bench space appropriately.